Welcome to History from a Hat. My name is Harry LaFontaine, and I'm here with...
You're here with Clinton, also known as Lord Clay.
Welcome, everyone. We're here doing a pilot episode for something that I'm hoping turns into something a little bit larger. The idea behind this is to just have fun. It's called History from a Hat because we are drawing random history topics out of, it's a box, but it's history from a hat nonetheless. I've got 90 small pieces of paper crumbled up in this box, and what we're going to do is draw one at a time and kind of see what each other knows about it, talk about it for a few minutes if we can. If it's something that we don't have any idea about, then, we'll just move on to the next one. And if it's something that we both have a good amount of knowledge on, we'll talk about it for a while, but we won't keep talking about it the whole time. We'll cut it off after a couple minutes. So we're gonna shake up the box.
A 1 in 90 chance that we'll either have a good conversation about it or it'll be a total flop and we'll have to move on to the next topic.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, I'm pulling a piece of paper. What do we got here? I'm excited. It says the Greek rise of the Polis. Clinton?
So we'll have to start with the Greeks battling who were they? Those early peoples, whenever the Greeks were starting to take over, those early wars for territory in like the pre-Bronze Age.
Well, the rise of the Polis would be like right after the Greek Dark Ages. So think like post-Homeric time. So the Mycenaeans were inhabiting the island as the main power towards the end of the Bronze Age, and then you had the Bronze Age collapse take place, which something that contributed to the Bronze Age collapse as far as the Mycenaeans were concerned is the migration of the Dorian Greeks from the north, and then it went into the and then from there
Conquerors.
Yeah, the Dorians.
Think about how different things would have gone had the Dorians, the early wars for territory and resources in what is that region called? Thessalonica?
Yeah, like northeast mainland Greece.
Yeah, the area that's near the Bosphorus, where Constantinople.
That's Thrace.
Thessalonica is the capital city. I'm totally flopping right now.
Nah, it's fine. Who would have thought that we would get the Greek rise of the Polis out of the 90 different random topics in the hat? So, but I know that Polis, I think, is Greek for people or something along those lines, and it's kind of like also includes like the idea of what a city is, which leads to the word politics. So that's the polis, and then you had several polities, I guess is what you'd call them, which would be the city states that we all know and love. Which you've got Athens, Corinth, Sparta. There's more.
I believe Illyria is one also.
All right, yeah. There's a couple more.
Macedon.
I don't know if that was a city-state or not.
Not technically a city-state. I don't think they ever really went past the kingdom phase.
Yeah, they were. The Macedonians weren't really involved with the city states until like Philip II started, trying to exert his dominance. But in the city state period, there's a couple more. I can't Thrace or not. There's Athens, Corinth, Thebes. Man, there's a couple more popular ones. Can't think of what they were.
No, I mean, off the top of my head, I am clueless. I am so rusty with that area of anything. You should have asked me this question whenever I was 11. I was obsessed.
Well, there's a couple other things I could add to this period myself, is that this is when some of the great philosophy that helped shape Western civilization was born, like Socrates, Diogenes, Plato, Aristotle. Like, they're all associated with the peak period of the polis, which, I mean, it really just comes down to the city-state.
Although one thing I can add is that the Iliad is probably one of my favorite books ever. Like, definitely top 10. I love the Iliad.
Maybe we could do a historical reading on that. I just finished up that Art of War playlist. I know that Iliad is broken down into like poetic stanzas, which is great for YouTube, just like the Art of War, because I feel like with how fast society moves and how fast people move, for audiobooks on YouTube in particular, if you do one video per chapter, so each video is only going to be a few minutes long, and you put it in a playlist, it'll be easier for people to keep track of where they're at, instead of having like a 2-hour audiobook or whatever. It just doesn't, that's just not real compatible with how society is now.
That book is amazing with its descriptions, and it's really definitely I like it better than reading the source material as the homogenized Hollywood production. Whenever you read that story, it is so fantastical with what is being described, as opposed to them making it more realistic. The realism that Hollywood tried to do while also keep.
Yeah, you mean like in the movie Troy?
And a recent one BBC had produced, I never actually got a chance to watch it because I don't watch TV, so.
Yeah, I didn't watch it either. I think I saw a preview for it. All right, we're going to draw another. Here comes the next piece of paper from the box. Let's close it up. 89 left. Let's see what we got here. Give us something good.
Eagerly await.
World War II African theater. All right.
Okay.
The African theater of operations in World War II.
The only thing I could really contribute to that off the top of my head is the Tiger 131.
Which is?
It was a Tiger 1 tank that was deployed in North Africa by the Third Reich, and their ace commander was just off the wall successful. up
Yeah, the
until
Tiger General. That's his name. That's his nickname, is the Tiger General. I can't remember his name.
Everyone knows Rommel.
Rommel. That's the guy. Yeah, that's the Tiger General. So he got that name from that model tank.
More than likely. I'm no authority on this subject either. I'm just familiar with some of it.
I have some stuff to add about the African theater of operations with regards to the Italians, because like the colonial period in Africa was mostly controlled by the English, French, and Portuguese, and that started taking place like in the middle of the 19th century. But then around the outset of World War II, while all the big news stuff was going on in Europe, Mussolini invaded into Egypt and the Sinai and actually moved southward into like Etruria and Somalia and
Ethiopia.
And Ethiopia, and was trying to like create traditional colonial holdings in those places. And still to this day, there's a couple of cities. I don't know the names of the cities, but from what I've read, there's a couple of cities in those places that are like holdouts from like the late Italian period. So there's like these Italian cities, architecturally speaking anyway, in these places in what, that Horn of Africa area, still to this day, that were really built like right during the peak of World War II.
Like the invasion of Ethiopia, like
the signal is not good.
Going to be.
You keep cutting out over and over again. So I'm gonna write this down. 13 minutes. So start again with the invasion of Ethiopia, whatever that thought was. Just go ahead and start with it.
The premise was that, Mussolini was promising the premise for the invasion of Ethiopia was money, but also dictators love riling up war anyway. It helps, cement power. But it ended up, that was literally the first step in the grave for the fascist state. But the main thing for anything involving Africa was typically coffee. So one fun fact is that after World War I, Germany lost all of their African holdings, so they no longer had access to coffee plants and stuff. And then embargoes by French, United States, Great Britain, like those powers, was literally the driving force behind amphetamine production.
No kidding.
Yes, it was literally marketed, like these amphetamine tablets were designed by these German.
I remember
mass
that
produced and sold.
Yeah, their soldiers during World War II were definitely using those the same way people drink coffee today.
Yeah, it was Titan. And so you had people taking these kind of like you would like a caffeine pill, because they, like, in Germany you could still get that coffee, but you're talking something that would be like $30 for 8 ounces of like brewed coffee. So cheaper to do the meth.
Yeah. I can add one more thing to the African theater of operations in World War II. I recall that I believe the Germans tried to maneuver their navy towards the Sinai in the Mediterranean, and the British pulled off like a brilliant naval blockade that separated the Italians and the Germans. And I want to say that this was towards the latter period of the war, so like 1943, 1944 time frame, and was sort of I think that brilliant maneuver by the British kind of contributes to that phrase of I think it's Hitler's soft underbelly.
Yeah, by that time in 1943, knowledge and remember is that by the time that the invasion of Sicily happened from North Africa, that the Third Reich had invested so many resources into Mussolini's regime that he was becoming a liability.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Sicily and in southern Italy itself, I think the Third Reich sent something like over 8 panzer divisions to help, and that just United States and all of them just overwhelmed. But it was I'd chalk it up to low morale on the Italian side and so many different little factors. And
I'm sure that had something to do with it, but I'll go back to what I just said now about that whatever that British naval maneuver was that kept the Italians and Germans separated because they were trying to unite. So like Hitler supporting Mussolini and his North African endeavors, or Horn of Africa endeavors, kind of. I don't want people to get led astray. We're not talking about Mauritania or Tunisia. We're not talking about around Sicily, but more around the Sinai. But that the fact that they remained separated, that really was a major factor in all of the rest of what you just said. So we're gonna draw another one. Here we go. What do we got? Ooh, the Viking Age. That's a good one. I'll let you go ahead. The Viking Age.
Viking Age, though, we want to start with the initial driving force behind those war bands getting started.
Mm-hmm.
Around, let me see if I can get my timeline right. Whenever the weather started changing.
Yeah, so like 5th century.
Basically, that ice age that started.
It wasn't an ice age. Yeah, it was a moderate cooling. So around like the beginning of the 5th century, around the same time the Romans left Britain.
Yeah. Whenever you look back at it, you see the romanticizations of it, big, strong Scandinavian men, they're depicted as having 6-pack abs and all this stuff, whenever a Viking band would have started, because those guys were just trying to get out of Dodge.
Yeah.
Just how turbulent Northern Europe had become because of these wars over farmland.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many factors in it to me, but like, yeah, you're basically indicating about the age of migrations, or the migration period, which it's caused by all of that. It's caused by those weather factors is a dumb way to say it, but environmental factors. And the environmental factors, which reduced crop yield and all that stuff, which was a main contributing factor to the Romans having to leave Britain, amongst other things. But Britain became a liability because it just wasn't producing enough food to sustain itself, let alone sustain the legions that were assigned there. And then that migration period was in many ways a result of the Christianization of Western Europe, because you've got all these Celts, which is essentially what they are, is Celts, and they're pagans, and the Christians, whether anyone wants to believe it or not, were 10 times more fierce in their persecutions of non-Christians than vice versa. And so these people are just trying to find arable land, a place to be, and all of that stuff. And they're being driven into northern Germany and Denmark. And some of the tribes that were there, like the Frisians and the Angles and the Saxons, they were forced out by the Celts and the Gauls. And they were the ones that inhibited Lower Scandinavia and migrated into Great Britain, which at that point in time was a melting pot. So you're into the 6th and 7th century by this timeline.
What happened with, like, before, around the time that the Saxons had come, was that whenever the legions were evacuating the Isles, was you had those Romano Britons, and they were completely domesticated because the legion was always there, and if you were the peasantry, so to speak, you weren't allowed to own weapons. And so that the Romans left, you had tens of thousands, if not more, people that did not know how to fight, who were used to being secure. But whenever the Picts and those proto-Scottish peoples in the north, and even maybe Irish raiders and such, they found out, well, those guys aren't there anymore, started just like terrorizing.
Well, the Welsh, there's a fun fact I can throw in right here, is that word Pict is Latin for painted. And there's a bunch of misconceptions about the peoples in terms, like, I think people tend to think that these like naked or nearly naked men that were painted was like all of the uncivilized world, but that's not the case. That it was literally just the people from modern day Scotland, the Picts. They were wearing the blue paint. They were fighting pretty much naked, and that's where that phrase comes from.
To my remembrance is that the Welsh weren't actually, well, they weren't actually a people by the time of evacuations. Those were the Romano British.
Yeah,
but whenever
no, the Welsh were the Britons. They were just outside of Roman control. Roman control at the time that the Romans left the British Isles was, like, if you look at a modern map, like a color-coded map, minus North Ireland, like the Romano British was like the country of England. So
yeah,
Wales, Scotland, and Ireland were separate from Roman control.
Whenever the Saxons started those Britons west, they would become the modern Welsh. And I believe, my remembrance is that the word Welsh is the Saxon word for stranger. Because of how eventually they would, modernize in terms of thinking when, they got a taste of like so many raids and stuff. They started taking up weapons of their own and just isolated themselves on like the peninsula that is Wales.
It's really cool stuff and interesting stuff. In the spirit of keeping it moving, we haven't even gotten to the actual Viking Age yet. So all the stuff we just discussed is all contributing factors. The Viking Age itself, by traditional standards, began with the raid on Lindisfarne in 793, right?
Yeah, that first taste of that monastery gold.
Mm-hmm. Which, and I'll contribute to that a little further, is that the Scandinavian people, whether they were Danes or Swedes or Norwegians, they weren't strangers to that island group. And so yeah, like when they showed up and just raided that monastery, there's the decent likelihood that when the monks inhabiting that place like saw those people coming, they probably assumed they were coming to trade or to pass through. The last thing they expected was to just get slaughtered the way they did, because that was a slaughter.
Is it possible that maybe the attack on Lindisfarne was some sort of inside job?
I don't know about that. That sounds a little conspiratorial, but I could say that, and it goes back to something I was saying before about how the forced Christianization of Western Europe forced a lot of those people north and northeast, and then ultimately, the people that were in those places were forced further away. It may have been kind of like an FU to monotheism from these pagans. They'd had enough. Their land wasn't arable in terms of being able to support their growing population, and so they turned it into a holy war. That was like the first battle of what was a holy war for the Scandinavians. Possibly. I mean, there's no way to know that for a fact, but it's a good hypothesis.
Like 100%, like, well, my opinion, I can't be 100% about anything, is like how did that Viking warband, if they're technically even a warband, they knew what that place was?
Because of trading.
Do you think maybe they were tipped off at some point? Because a lot of those guys were just fresh, trying to just get out.
Well, I think a lot of those people were already familiar with the lay of that land, at least somewhat familiar, because of trade. Because that's what the whole of the Scandinavian people at that time, in terms of the way other peoples viewed them, was that they were traders. So the people on the British Isles, the people in modern day France, the people in like lower Germany, like Saxony, if you will, to all of those people, the Scandinavians were traders. So when they unleashed holy fury the way they did, that was totally unexpected, but they knew where they were going, but not because they were tipped off, because of previous experience in their trading.
So that does make sense. I always looked at it from a few different angles, because I'm like, no one that organizes like that's going to attack a hard target. But if a lot of them are kind of, as isolated as many of those men would have been in, say, if they were in Denmark, a lot of them would have been kind of tied to their farmlands and not really that traveled or well read, if you didn't have the boats already. So you had a merchant class that was trading, but how many, say, Danish or Norwegian merchants would have just been like, I'm a fighter now.
Yeah, I mean, that's good insight. And then, I mean, you got to think about how quickly generations passed at that time. So it could be just a period of 10 or 15 years where these traders and these merchants, you know, had an overabundance of young fighting power, not fighting power, but young men coming up. And then the way the climate of things were changing, not only the actual environmental climate, but just the climate of territory and possible like overpopulation in those northern lands where the people needed to acquire land to farm. So they had, you know, a large population of military aged fighting men who quite possibly, you know, just took it upon themselves to go ahead and sally forth and start trying to acquire land and wealth.
But one of my favorite things is the Dane law. You know, like talking about Viking Age and just how awful that would have been to live through. As you had Saxon kingdoms just on and off, like 30 Saxon kingdoms rose and fell in a 7-year time frame. All the while you had the Dane law established. And so you had these Northern European and Western Germans like the Saxons just axing each other all the time. And then you had the Britons just like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it makes me think about like when you said all that multitude of Saxon kingdoms, that phrase just is very British Isles centric to me, just in my own mind. And kingdoms is a little bit of a misnomer, I think. So it's more probably like duchies, you know, like small bits of territory, but like a lot of small states, almost like city states. And then the Dane law was it was a result of the great heathen army invasion, and they took large amounts of territory from central Britain, and a lot of the citizens were treated fairly enough. I mean, no more unfairly than their previous overlords. And, you know, that huge army needed fed, and those people were also trying to assimilate themselves into those populations. And the concentration of nobility and military strength moved into Wessex and Suffolk and East Anglia.
Whenever like I disagree with you a little bit, only that calling those 30 kingdoms like duchies is that the kingdoms were led by men who assumed kingship. They were crowning themselves. Just
yeah, I was saying duchy, and just in terms of like they didn't have powerful vassals underneath them. So like,
but I mean,
to me, to be a king, you have to have powerful vassals that work for you. You can't be a king of nothing. So they may have been calling themselves kings, but they weren't. You can't be the king of 40 square miles. That's not a kingdom.
That's just like how it was, though, was that, I mean, these men were literally assuming kingship of these small, maybe not even like you said, 40 miles. And they were the functioning government.
Well, it's like, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like it's
Place of county.
Kingship might just be a misnomer. It's they assume rulership or total control of these small areas. It doesn't make them a king just because they say they're a king. It's such a small territory, and they have like no vassals, so they're just warlords.
Well, I mean, I'll have to disagree again. I mean, if they had vassals, I mean, they would have had a court, and following the line from the book Starship Troopers is that violence is the only true measure of authority. If they had armed men to enforce their government and policies while calling themselves kings.
I think we define kingship differently than you and I, which is fine. I mean, I just think when I think of a king, I think of a kingdom.
Yeah, you're thinking of, epic men like Edward the First, even Charlemagne, who was emperor.
I'm not thinking of men. I'm thinking of.
Oh yeah, and control of territory too.
Yeah, amount of territory. That's what I'm really thinking about, is just the amount of territory. That's why I say more like a duchy as opposed to a kingdom, but that doesn't really have anything to do with whether those guys called themselves kings or not. It's just
in Wales itself, for like another British Isles comparison, the Welsh before Edward the First invaded and conquered, they had 11 kingdoms in Wales.
Yeah.
Before Edward the First assumed control, because you had like a king of Gwent, and the area that would become the area that is Carnarvon, and what is now Derbyshire and such. So like you had fully functioning governments led by someone who was, anointed in some way or another as having the mandate of heaven, or the right to rule, noble birth,
the divine right to rule. It's funny because like you think about the comparison back to the very beginning of our little show here. We were talking about city-states and the rise of the polis. So it's comparable to that. So I feel like the word king and the idea of kingship, regardless of whether there was 11 in Wales or 30 in the British Isles, it's just a misnomer.
I don't necessarily think it's a misnomer. It's more like a dictator, like anyone that's dictating from the position of authority like that, and the culture of, the strong man, I think, is, if you were like someone in one of those Saxon kingdoms and you would tell them, well, he's not king, he'd send his, what are they called?
Dictator is a better word. You used that word a couple times. They were just dictators. It just, to me, that doesn't define a kingdom. Whether they called themselves kings or not, whether the idea is that they have a 2 square mile kingdom, like that doesn't really, what they thought doesn't really matter in practical terms to me. Moving on. Moving on. So Viking Age. Where did we go? We went from the Danelaw into all of that. We kind of skipped over part of what. All right, so with the Danelaw, with that great heathen army, you've got the idea of the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, right? Which would have been Ubba, Vitserk, Ivar, I can't think of any of the other ones, but the one that really stands out is Ivar, obviously. And one thing that's interesting to me about that is with the founding of the trade cities in Ireland. So like Dublin, Cork,
I believe
help me out
Cobb.
here.
Cobb is one of them, like in Southern Ireland.
Yeah. So Cork is
And
on one side in Southern Ireland, and Cobb is on the other side. Then
then
you've got Dublin.
going up north to Ireland, you had, I'm not sure, someone will have to fact check me on it. I'm pretty sure Derry was one of those cities.
But
Trim.
there's some interesting Catholic texts. Catholic, I'm using that term loosely, but the people there were Catholic. The base population of Ireland during that time were Catholic, and they had some of the best scribes. And there are some writings from some of these scribes that describe a guy named Imar, like Imar, in the way we view our script, but the way their script is that what we would read as the word Imar to them would have been pronounced Imar, because there's so few historical records on Ivar. Like, it's even contested that he may have not actually existed. But I think it's pretty apparent that he did, especially with that, because I mean, they were destroying literary works in their wake. They were destroying everything in their wake, especially Christian literary works. That's the stuff that was getting destroyed. They were taking all the resources that were valuable. Books weren't valuable to them. They didn't even really have a written language outside of those runes, which were really only used for like ceremonial purposes. But those scribes in Ireland wrote about Imar, and it's a scholarly debate about whether or not Ivar the Boneless was like the founder or one of the founders of Dublin itself. And those Catholic texts kind of support that.
Now, you brought up the runic script. Those were actually used mostly as they keep finding them buried in Sweden and Norway, and sometimes even in, I think they found several in the UK. They were used mostly as kind of like property lines.
Yeah, stele, like I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but like similar to the way a lot of the Egyptian stonework was done. Stela.
I'm not entirely sure.
But that's the word. Yeah, it's the same function. So it's ceremonial in some ways as far as like funerary stuff is concerned with the Scandinavians in particular. But yeah, boundaries, geographic maps almost, if you will. Like we are here in this area up to the edge of this river and the edge of this hill and the edge of this sea. Everything inside of that is ours.
So one interesting thing is that poetic Edda and the prose Edda were by a Catholic monk.
Snorri Sturluson.
Yes. So yeah. All those stories, like that whole like mythology, those beliefs were just like an oral tradition up until he sat down probably with a bunch of the old timers in Iceland so that he could hear those stories and put them all in a book.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me so much of Homer, like that, the process of the poetic and prose Eddas, it totally reminds me of how the Homeric stuff would have came to life. Oral tradition that took place over centuries, cultural changes, religious changes, and then finally there was a script and the right scribe. So like the difference is that Homer more than likely never existed, and there was like a handful of different scribes that ultimately wrote down these oral traditions in archaic Greece in like the middle of the 8th century BC. But by the time you get to the 13th century AD, Snorri Sturluson could, he was an actual just one-man scribe that did the same process. But the difference is that he definitely existed, and Homer almost certainly did not exist.
Yeah, I'm up in the air about that, as if Homer really did exist or not. But he or they certainly, like, they put out a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a powerful pseudonym. I mean, Homer exists in our world whether he actually lived or not. Kind of like Jesus. I mean, he was, even if he didn't exist, he's by the power of literature brought into existence.
But I'd recommend to all our viewers to go out and find a copy of the Poetic Edda. It is a great read, too.
I agree completely. Everyone should own that.
I mean, if you're into the absolute wildest kind of stuff, Loki cross-dressing to convince a giant to give back Thor his hammer. Then the events of the Ragnarok.
Some of the best mythology in the world.
Yeah, the Odin seeing his own fate, trying to stop it, but then just self-fulfilling the prophecy of his own death and destruction of the world.
Yeah, and it's like with those kind of mythologies, it's funny because especially with the Icelandic sagas, is that it's so fantastical and awesome, but if you get familiar enough with it, you can kind of cut through it and understand that within every man and woman, I use the word man loosely, I just mean mankind when I use the word man. It's the inevitable internal struggle that every person faces. And
now,
that's just really cool to me.
Taking the comparisons between the Greek and the Norse mythology, like, so many things overlap that are almost copy and paste from each other, because you have like your pantheon of gods trying to battle these primal deities like the Titans. In Norse mythology, you had the Jotun, the giants.
Yep.
And then the same thing is with the Titans and the gods themselves.
Well, it's that Indo-European pagan migration, man, that took place over the period of over 1,000 years.
Like how, like, the gods were accidentally or intentionally spawning these awful monsters like Medusa, the Chimera, the what else was it? Few dragons that the Greeks had. The Norse had a few dragons, like the Nithog, Python. And it was like all these similarities between these two, where you had Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Loki even birthing who would become in the underworld. So anyone viewing this should take some time and just kind of correlate all these different elements in these mythologies to be like, could be a fun time.
I agree completely. It's I thank you for your input on this. It's really good. We're going to march forward, still with the Viking Age. So at the end of the Danelaw, or during the Danelaw period, there was a few other things that happened. There were some Danish and Norwegian incursions into the Seine and Saône rivers into mainland France. And one of those incursions is in the Icelandic sagas and is attributed to Ragnar Lothbrok. That one is more than likely legendary. Ragnar's a borderline mythical figure, but there's one that's very real, and that is Rolf or Rollo, Rollo the Walker, and he got all the way to Paris, I think, for a second time, and was bought off with a Danegeld, but within that Danegeld, or associated with that Danegeld in some way or another, was I think it was Charles the Bald or Charles the Fat, one of Charlemagne's.
It was Charles the Bold. I believe he was Charles the Bold.
Bald. No, Charles the Bald. Not
I got the other Charles the Bold. There was a Charles the Bold. I got him confused with Bald.
I don't know if he was Carolingian or not, but so if it was Charles the Bald or Charles the Fat, I'm not sure, but they gave him land at the mouth of the Seine, which was the county of Rouen, and that county, during Rollo's lifetime, he acquired more territory around there, which ultimately became the Duchy of Normandy. And his job for the French king was to keep out other raiders, keep other raiders from entering that river system, and then hence being able to approach Paris. And so in his role there, like I said, he created that Duchy of Normandy, and they held that land, and that became the Normans. And one of those Normans was William the Bastard, who became William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, where he became the King of England. And he was the great grandson of Rollo. It's like 5 generations.
Yeah. I believe he was distantly related to William Longsword, if not directly descended.
Via the matrilineal line, right? So there's like a marriage in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So he's related to both of them.
William Longsword was Rollo's great grandson, I believe.
Okay.
But Rollo the Walker had something reportedly of about 200 children,
which was not unusual, surprisingly.
He was a busy man,
to say the least. But also, so more of the Viking Age, I touched that year, 1066. So there's another fella. There's 2 fellas named Harold. Harold Godwinson was the main power in Britannia. We'll call it that.
Was Saxon.
Yeah, well, by then they were pretty much all that. But so you had him, and then you had Harold Hardrada, and we completely skipped over Alfred, but we can touch on that. But yeah, so Harold Hardrada, who had pressed his claim on the English crown or the British crown, whatever it would have even been called then. I don't know what they would have called it, in the same year as William the Bastard. So they both attack England. And then Harold Godwinson defeats Harold Hardrada at Stamford Bridge. and then travels south to lose to William the Bastard / Conqueror a couple months later. But Harold Hardrada himself, like that man was like the ultimate Viking. Which Hardrada, by the way, Hardrada translates to hard ruler.
I am on the side of the fence that Harold Godwinson actually did renege on his offer to Duke William, which is what initially sparked the invasion, was that whenever Edward the Confessor died, that he would pass the kingship over to William. Mm-hmm. But whenever Edward the Confessor died, he took the crown for himself, which spurred on that invasion, that battle for the crown.
Well, yeah, that southern invasion, but the northern invasion was a result of what Svein Forkbeard had claim. He was the king of the North Sea Empire. He was briefly the king of England for like 2 years during old age, and Harold Hardrada was like his nephew or great nephew or something like that. So I mean, yeah, people were coming for England.
Harold Hardrada, I think he had to be exiled because of there was a conspiracy to kill his uncle, or it was his father that was killed, and his uncle took over the crown.
Yeah, that's Spain Forkbeard.
Yeah.
Harold Hardrada was also part of the Varangian Guard before that. Like for a decade. He was like the commander of the Varangian Guard for like Michael the Sixth, I think. In the Byzantine Empire, for those who don't know what that is.
He did serve in the Varangian, and then I think after Michael the Sixth, I do think that was him. Whenever he died within 2 years of Harold taking that position, right?
Is that Basil II took over after Michael the Sixth? And Basil II is what, Pyrophagenitus or something like that. I can't think of the exact, but he was the Bulgar Slayer. Basil the Bulgar Slayer. And there was a lot of warfare going on the Thracian Bulgarian front during that time, which was around the same time as the Great Schism.
Yeah, right. I think so.
Viking Age. We spent enough time on the Viking Age. That was a really good draw. The chances of drawing that piece of paper were 1 in 90. Let's draw another one.
Actually 1 in 89, wasn't it?
Well, it was at the outset. It was 1 in 90, so that was the third one. So it was 1 out of 88 chance of drawing that. That was a really good one. We're probably gonna get a bad one now. Let's see. What do we got? What do we got? We've got. We got another good one, man. The Third Crusade. That's great.
Oh,
That's great
Lord.
Indeed. Oh, Lord, indeed. The Third Crusade. Go ahead, man.
Now, I'm a little bit rusty. I need a start point because I'm more familiar with the Second Crusade itself rather than the Third Crusade.
For the Third Crusade, I'll give you 2 start points. One is Richard the Lionheart. The other is Salah ad-Din.
Are you sure that's the Third Crusade?
Pretty sure.
Because I know that the Battle of Arsuf happened in the Second Crusade, because around that time, after the Siege of Acre was whenever the Lionheart forced into that weird peace negotiation, and Richard left, where he died in France.
I think he left and came back. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I know that if I'm wrong, that I know nothing about the Third Crusade then.
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure the Third Crusade was like the culmination of Richard versus Saladin.
Because like right after Richard the Lionheart left, he died. I want to maybe 2 years later, because he was fighting in France.
Yeah.
Like he got gunned down with a crossbow.
I think we're just gonna move on then, because I'm not gonna look at Google. So let's just draw another one.
We just have to take L.
Yep, here we go. We got another one coming. What's this one? We got Knights Templar. I know a little bit about Knights Templar.
Bankers turned to mercenary.
Yeah. The Knights Templar is a pretty interesting one.
I believe they were a core theme in the book Ivanhoe, which is a good book too.
I have not read that. I've heard of it, haven't read it.
If you have Amazon Prime, the series adaptation of that book is on Amazon Prime right now, and it's a good watch also.
Thanks to our sponsors, Amazon.
Yes. Thank you for the protein bars that you dropped on my doorstep in a day. Yeah.
The Knights Templar. I'm thinking about I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I can't think of his name, but he was a second generation landholder that was a byproduct of the First Crusade, I think, and he was there holding one of those walled cities in the Holy Land. I can't remember which one, but he was short-staffed and short of money and all of that, and somehow, because you said banker, he created this business maneuver where he got, I can't think of he got given an estate, which was like a rundown castle, and he was getting pumped with money and sent young like squires or men that were approaching military fighting age with the whole concept of protecting pilgrims that were going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So he was covering a route that went from southeast Turkey into the Levant all the way to Jerusalem, which was like filled with bandits, fraught with danger, all of that. And they were like a mobile bodyguard for like random poor people.
Yeah, it was half decent business model. Like you take all your dispossessed inheritors or who weren't even going to inherit, you tell them, well, hey, we'll always have work for you at least. And then eventually, like, the business grows into what it was essentially a medieval corporation just dedicated to, good guy versus bad guy
protection. So the holy, the Teamsters Union of the Holy Land.
Basically, that's inevitably what led to their downfall. I'm not brushed up enough, and I cannot talk. I am unscripted. They started doing heavy money lending, which technically is against papal law. Usually, I guess they got around that.
If they're charging any interest, it's like a grave sin. That's usury.
Yeah, so they got around the usury thing, but by the time that they were all put on trial, the Philip II of France, was it Philip II? I might need fact check.
Yeah, like right around 1200.
He borrowed money and manpower from the order and basically lost that fight. And so he was so heavily indebted to the order because you can't replace, some 100 heavily trained armored fighting men anyway. So that's almost like an irreplaceable resource within the time frame. You can't grow knives like you grow trees.
Yeah, I've read historians say that one of those knights was worth 100 regular soldiers.
Yeah, even definitely, like, highly trained, highly motivated, well-fed, well-armored, especially
That's the thing is the well-armored, ironclad men, I believe is what I read.
Like, onto like the basics, like the fact that they would have been better fed than most of these, say, conscripted foot soldiers. That is such a huge advantage in everything.
Yeah. It is. It makes me think of I can't even think of who wrote it, but maybe it was Julius Caesar. But the army, the success of the army relies on its gut. Something like that. And I think Napoleon may have revisited that. What?
Yeah, but I know exactly who you're talking about. I just cannot say the name. It might have been Caesar.
Of course it was Caesar. All right. Shaking up the box. Here we go. Drawing history from a hat with Lord Clinton. What do we got? What do we got? I knew this was going to friggin' happen. Gandhi. I knew this was going to happen. Gandhi.
I'm kind of ashamed that I don't know much about him.
Mahatma Gandhi. The only things I can think of are civil disobedience.
Hunger.
The hunger strike was the civil disobedience. And there was, if I'm right, there was like a sort of combination of caste system / apartheid going on, which was dictated by the British Crown / East India Company as like a long-term result of the spice trade. That's like really all I got.
If I remember right, he was really, really mad about Pakistan.
Why?
The to heck if I know. I just know that there was like some big stuff with Pakistan.
All right. Well, that's it for Gandhi. I knew that, like, when I wrote that down, I was like, because there are 90 pieces of paper, and I was towards the end, like the last 15 of them, I was like just trying to come up with anything to fill up the paper because I got 30 per page. Gandhi ended up being written in there, and I knew it was going to get drawn.
Like Gandhi getting mad about the British Crown funding Pakistan's gender programs like we are here now.
Can you elaborate on that?
Off topic. Whenever they tried to pass that coronavirus relief bill, part of the bill was several millions, billions, or trillions of dollars into what was on the paper written as gender studies programs in Pakistan.
Understood. I'm going to stop you right there. Draw on another piece of paper. What do we got? Give me something good. Iconoclasm. All right.
Smash pigs.
Byzantine Empire. I think of Irene.
Western Roman Empire.
Eastern Roman Empire.
What happened in the East and the West at different times? I just can't remember the
Iconoclasm. Iconoclasm was, let's see, it was like the Macedonian emperors, like the latter portion of the Macedonian emperors, which included Irene, which I think she was the most fierce of the iconoclasts. And yeah, they were just...
So this is like an actual Flashpoint event, as opposed to... I just assumed the word iconoclasm with like several events that happened in Europe and even in Islam, where...
No, I wrote this in specifically referring to the Byzantine iconoclast period.
Okay, so I'm on track.
You can talk about it. You can say anything you want about it, but that's why I wrote it down.
Yeah, I was just missing context on whether we were talking about the act or the event that happened.
Yeah, I was referring to like the historical event. I don't know a ton about it, but I know that it was a major contributing factor to the schism. I know that their whole objective was to eliminate anything that could be considered idolatry. So like all material, symbolic, anything that was used for worship was like heresy. So all that stuff was just getting destroyed. So like you said right at the beginning,
examples of that,
like
that I know of is that, like, one example I remember that stands out is that there is a statue of the goddess Athena that has her, they chiseled off her nose and then chiseled crosses on her face to turn her into a Christian symbol as opposed to the Greek pantheon symbol. Some part of the lore is that at the time of the conversion is that all the old gods were sent into hell.
Interesting.
So it wasn't like the conversion process whenever, I can't remember what book of the Bible it is, with the Apostle Paul, was that they found because like there's a lot of correlation between
Well, who was he writing to? Was he writing to people in Greece? Because that would be the book Corinthians.
Yes, in Corinthians, there is a verse about how basically the Lord God, the Greeks would keep altars to and give offering a god that was unknown.
I see. I see.
So
Yes,
that's where
any god who wasn't
where,
God.
there was like already like the ground for monotheism in pagan Greece, because there's like statues that have been found where they refer to Zeus as the one god. So there was places in Greece where they worshipped only a single god and didn't necessarily acknowledge the others in the pantheon.
No, that's a misinterpretation. That's a misinterpretation because it's lost in translation. So in Greek, during the time when that would have been written, saying something like the one God is more or less saying like the king of the gods.
I'm not talking about like the Bible. This isn't in the Bible. The example
I know
of
that's what I'm saying is during the period where Greece was polytheistic and worshiping the pantheon, it's a translation issue, is what I'm saying. So like if some Christian much later on would have read or mistranslated something as the one God, what he's really reading is the king of the gods. There was no point in time during the Greek pantheon during that heyday where they went into any kind of monotheistic practice. It was there's the rank structure. All the gods are still gods, but there's a king of gods. There was no monotheistic practice in Greece at all.
The example that I'm referring to was an example. Well, I cannot talk. I'm tongue twisted. It was a statue that they found in, I want to say they dug it up out of Delphi or near Delphi whenever they're excavating it.
Mm-hmm.
And like the translation from the Greek is that all signs indicate that this was an area that only worshipped Zeus as a monotheist god. And
I've never heard it.
Well, I can try and find it for you here later whenever I have access to Google.
Sounds like pseudo mythology to me.
I can try and find that statue for you here later.
Yeah, let's do that.
The biggest correlation, though, is that there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that mimics Homer.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. But that's off topic. That's off topic. I'm drawing another one. Let's see here. Give me some sugar. What do we got? Late Greek period, Peloponnesian Wars.
Peloponnesian Wars. That was with Rome, right?
No, that was Athens and Sparta.
Okay. I'm
not well versed. I just
my
know that
my mental timeline for events and stuff is a little bit askewed.
There's the main thing that I can say about the Peloponnesian Wars, which I know almost nothing, is that in Sparta for a long time there was like these two classes of people. So there was the Spartans, which the main citizens and the ruling class, and then there were these people called the Helots. At some point during the Peloponnesian War, or as a result of the Peloponnesian Wars, the Helots were relocated by the Athenians and given like their own land and became their own city-state or something like that. So the Spartans lost control over the Helots. I know there was like 3 Peloponnesian Wars. I think that might have been the result of the third.
A result of the Third Crusade.
No, the third Peloponnesian War. I am drawing another one. It's going to be the last one. This is the last one. We got an hour and 20 minutes on this. Let's see. What do we got? Come on. Be something.
Viewers know that I was just a Third Crusade thing.
Genghis Khan. I could go on for another hour and 20 minutes about this. Genghis Khan.
That's 8 hours of content right there.
Let's be quick about it then. I'll give a timeline. He was born in 1162 in April. His father was poisoned shortly after he chose his wife Borte from a neighboring tribe. I can't think of the name of that neighboring tribe, but then his family was dispersed. His father was the Khan of a relatively well-known tribe, but then the other tribes closed in. Genghis went with his brothers and half-brothers into the steppe with their mother, who did teach him one extremely valuable lesson involving the arrows. I mean, most people who have gotten this far into this video will know something about this. She gave him one arrow and told him to break it, and he broke it. And then she gave him a bundle of arrows and told him to break those, and he couldn't break them. And then she said something about, like, keep your tribe together kind of thing. Genghis went on to become blood brothers with Jamuka. And it was the Merkits. It was the Merkits who poisoned his father, and they took his betrothed. So with Jamuka, they defeated the Merkits. He took his wife back, who may or may not have been pregnant at that time, but that child was raised as his own. I think his name was Joshi. And then, let's see. There was a sable coat involved somewhere in there as far as the dowry. I'm not sure if that was before or after she was kidnapped. Obviously, he went on to unify the Mongols, in doing so, he defeated his own blood brother, Jamuka, which was his former ally. Upon uniting the Mongols, which would have taken place in the year 1206, he started expanding outwards, conquering many lands, including the Khwarezm Empire, large portions of northern China. He went as far as Western Europe in the northwest area. And I know with the Khwarezm was where he had sent a delegation to make peace with them or to set up some kind of trade relation, and they sent them back.
He was trying to set up some, like, harmless endeavor.
Yeah, like a trade relation, something like that.
Yeah, and even just like, hey, I'm the top dog here in this region. Here's my people. Then they just then they kill all of those messengers except one, but they cut off his beard.
And that was there was 2 separate delegations. In the first delegation, they just sent them back and said, we're not going to talk to you people. And so he sent another delegation, and then that's the one where, yeah, they did something like that. Like, they killed all of them except one guy and sent him back, and that was Genghis Khan had zero tolerance for that as far as killing peace officers. And he completely demolished all of their land, burned every city they had to the ground, all of that. And then he, just to keep it brief, from there went back into China again. He was either struck by an arrow or fell off of his horse or a combination of both, and died in 1227 as a result of that event. And the Mongols persisted from there. But yeah, anything outside of that, yeah, you're right. It's 8 hours worth of it could just go on and on. I mean, there's so much.
I mean, we only have 8 hours in a day, too, so.
All right. Well, sorry to disappoint anyone who wanted more out of the Genghis Khan draw. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you, Lord Clinton, and I hope that we can do this again and do this some more and have some more people involved and really grow this into something.
This was a fun time. I mean, definitely something I'd be willing to participate in again. And maybe later on down the road we can refine it. We should have more bells.
Bells.
Yeah, like a dinger. Like, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good rough draft, though. I'm happy with it. I can't wait to edit it and get it up on the channel. Hopefully it's the first video in a really long playlist of a lot of really awesome videos involving history from a hat. Thank you, Clinton.
Thank you for having me.
All right. See you later.